They laughed the first time she marked the rows. Not quietly, either. Pickup trucks slowed on the gravel road beside the Miller property. Men leaned elbows out windows. Two brothers from the next farm overstood by the fence and watched with the kind of amusement reserved for mistakes that hadn't happened yet. Sarah Miller kept hammering stakes into the ground. White string ran between them in long straight lines across 80 acres of Iowa black soil. The field had always been corn. Her father had planted corn there. Her grandfather before him. Every spring, the same pattern. Disc, plant, spray, harvest, repeat. But Sarah was spacing rows wider than any corn planter needed. And every 30 feet, she marked circles where no corn would go at all. "What's she doing?" one man called out. Sarah straightened, wiped dirt from her hands, and looked toward the road. "Planting." That got a few laughs. "Looks more like wasting land." She smiled faintly and returned to work. By sunset, the whole field looked wrong to anyone who knew farming. Corn rows broken by open gaps. Perimeter lanes widened. Irrigation points moved. Nothing about it matched the habits of the county. That was the first thing people hated. The second came a week later when the trees arrived. Two flatbed trailers rolled into the yard carrying young apple, pear, peach, and cherry saplings wrapped in burlap. Neighbors came just to watch unloading. Mark Jensen stood with crossed arms beside 3 others near the machine shed. "She's serious," he muttered. One of the brothers laughed. "She'll learn." Sarah climbed onto the trailer, passed down saplings one by one, and directed where each variety would go. North side, apples for wind protection. Lower drainage strip, pears. Warmest rise, peaches. Cherries nearest the lane for pollination access and easier seasonal pick traffic she hoped one day would exist. No one understood that sentence when she said it. Pick traffic. They thought she was joking. Her father, Daniel Miller, wasn't laughing. He found her after dark in the kitchen, soil still on her jeans, maps spread across the table. "You're removing 12 acres of corn potential," he said. "Temporarily. You're spending money we don't have on trees that won't pay for years. They'll pay longer than corn." Daniel sat heavily in the chair across from her. He was a good farmer. Respected. Careful. But like many men who survived decades in agriculture, he trusted what had already worked more than what might. "You know what they're saying." "I know. You care?" "No." That answer irritated him because he wished he believed it as easily as she did. Sarah pointed at the map. "Corn gives one product once a year. These trees give fruit, shade, windbreak, pollinator habitat, water retention, root stability, and another income stream." Daniel stared at the page. "This is Iowa. It's land," she said. "Land works if you understand it." He had no response ready for that. So he stood and went to bed unconvinced. The first 2 years were ugly. Trees needed staking, pruning, guards against rabbits, irrigation in dry weeks, replacement after winter loss. Corn yields dropped near young root zones while spacing adjusted. Equipment turns were slower. Weed pressure increased where conventional routines no longer fit. Every problem became public news. Mark stopped by during second summer while Sarah repaired drip line. "How's the orchard corn miracle?" She didn't look up. "Alive." He kicked at the dirt. "Could have had full corn out here. Could have had the same margins as everyone else too." Mark chuckled. "You talk like a banker." "No," she said. "Bankers like sameness." The county remained unconvinced. At coffee shops and feed stores, her field became shorthand for foolishness. Don't pull a Sarah, meaning don't get creative, meaning don't disturb habits, meaning don't make other people uncomfortable by trying something new where they can see it. But Sarah kept records. Sun exposure, moisture retention, bird pressure, wind speed reduction after tree growth, soil organic matter shifts in mulched zones, corn performance by distance from tree lines. Patterns emerged slowly. Year 3, wind damage fell on the western quarter. Year 4, pollinator counts doubled. Year 5, summer moisture held longer during a dry spell. Year 6, apples produced enough to sell locally. That was the first time laughter became questions. How many bushels did corn lose? What did apples bring per crate? Who buys pears around here? Sarah answered some. Not all. Because curiosity often arrives after ridicule wearing cleaner clothes. She hired 2 seasonal workers in year 7, then built a small roadside stand from reclaimed barn wood. Fresh apples, pears, honey from hives placed near flowering rows, corn bundles in fall, cherry jam made in a licensed shared kitchen. Families started coming on weekends. Kids walked lanes between trees while corn rose tall in neighboring strips. People took photos under blossoms every spring. The same neighbors who mocked her now brought relatives to see that interesting place. Daniel noticed this before he admitted it. One October Saturday, he stood by the register while Sarah loaded bags of apples. Cars lined the lane. Cash drawer full. He watched a customer pay more for one bag of peaches than a wagon load of field corn had recently netted after trucking. That night he sat at the kitchen table in silence. Sarah poured coffee. "Well?" she asked. He looked up. "I hate being wrong slowly." She laughed for the first time all day. By year 8, the field no longer looked strange. It looked beautiful. Rows of mature trees formed living corridors through bands of corn and cover crops. Blossoms in spring, shade in summer, color in fall. Birds nested. Bees worked. Soil darkened and softened. Agronomist from the university requested a visit. A regional magazine featured the farm. Then investors began calling. That was when Sarah became cautious. Because praise from neighbors was harmless, interest from outsiders usually wanted ownership. She declined meetings politely. Until the drought year. Year 10 began dry and stayed worse. Rain missed the county for weeks at a time. Conventional cornfields curled gray-green by noon. Yields dropped before August even arrived. But Sarah's 80 acres held differently. Tree shade reduced wind stress. Root systems improved infiltration from earlier rains. Mulched strips conserved moisture. Corn rows nearest tree lanes stayed greener than open fields. Fruit yields dipped, but survived. Traffic on the road slowed daily as farmers looked across her field and then back at their own. Mark Jensen came one evening, hat in hand. "I need to ask something." Sarah waited. "Can I walk it?" "Walk what?" "The system." She handed him a water bottle. Gates open. They walked in silence through shaded lanes where cooler air moved between trees. Mark finally said what many were thinking. "We laughed because it looked wrong." "No," Sarah replied. "You laughed because it looked different." He accepted that. At harvest, her numbers stunned the county. Corn from the integrated rows outperformed many full monocrop fields hit by drought. Fruit sales surged because regional supply had fallen elsewhere. Tourism traffic doubled during fall weekends. Total revenue from the 80 acres exceeded neighboring farms with triple the land. And then, on the first Monday after harvest, 3 black SUVs rolled into the lane. Men in pressed boots stepped out carrying folders. Daniel watched from the porch. Sarah met them by the stand. The lead man smiled professionally. "Ms. Miller, we represent Prairie Horizon Agricultural Holdings." She said nothing. He looked across the field of trees between corn rows glowing gold in late sun. "We'd like to discuss purchasing your farm." The man introduced himself as Grant Holloway. Prairie Horizon Agricultural Holdings. The name sounded expensive and intentionally vague. He shook Sarah's hand with the confidence of someone used to buying things that once said no. "We've been following your operation," he said. "That sounds unsettling." He smiled politely, unsure if she was joking. "We specialize in scalable agricultural innovation." Daniel, still on the porch, muttered loud enough to carry. "That means they buy what other people built." Grant pretended not to hear it. He opened a folder and slid a printed sheet toward Sarah. A number sat in bold at the bottom. It was more money than the Miller family had ever seen in one place. Daniel stepped off the porch. Mark Jensen, who happened to be loading pumpkins into his truck nearby, slowed without trying to look obvious. Grant continued, "We believe your integrated orchard row system can be expanded regionally. We'd retain you as consulting director if desired." Sarah looked past him toward the field. Apple trees moving lightly in the wind. Corn stubble gold between rows. Children laughing near the stand where their parents bought cider. 10 years of work stood there. 10 years of ridicule, repairs, pruning, failed grafts, late frosts, drought calculations, spreadsheets, and stubbornness. She handed the paper back. "No." Grant blinked once. "I'm not sure you understand the valuation. I understand numbers. This is a premium offer. This is my farm." He adjusted quickly. "We're prepared to negotiate." Sarah nodded toward the road. "You're free to practice on the drive out." The meeting ended less smoothly than it began. But it didn't end the interest. Within 2 weeks, 2 more firms called. Then a produce distributor. Then a land group from Illinois. Then a university partnership inquiry that sounded sincere until ownership clauses appeared in paragraph 4. Everyone suddenly loved what everyone had mocked. That part amused Daniel more than anything else. At breakfast one morning, he held a newspaper article with Sarah's photo on the front page. Headline: Local farmer redefines Midwest productivity. He snorted. 10 years ago they called you crazy. They still might. Now they'll say visionary while asking for meetings. He folded the paper and smiled into his coffee. I preferred crazy. Fewer emails. But the attention brought real choices. The farm was profitable now. Very profitable some seasons. But expansion required labor, packing space, cold storage, more irrigation, more systems. Selling would solve effort. Keeping it would require more. Sarah walked the lanes alone that evening. The orchard was entering dormancy. Leaves rustled dry underfoot. Bare branches framed the sunset. She stopped at the first apple row she planted by hand. Back then the trees were sticks tied to stakes. Now they cast shade 30 feet wide in summer. She remembered every joke, every warning, every person who explained why it couldn't work. And every morning she worked anyway. The next week she invited Grant Holloway back. He arrived smiling. Certain persistence had paid off. Sarah met him at the packing shed with folders of her own. I've reconsidered, she said. Grant straightened immediately. Excellent. She handed him a document. He read the first page. Then the second. His smile thinned. This isn't an acquisition proposal. No. It's a supplier agreement. Correct. She pointed toward the field. You wanted scalable innovation. I own one. You can license fruit under our label, purchase our excess production, and fund expansion infrastructure at market return. Grant looked up. You expect us to invest without ownership? I expect you to decide whether you wanted the system or just the land. Daniel, standing in the doorway behind her, nearly choked trying not to laugh. Grant closed the folder slowly. These terms are aggressive. So was showing up to buy my family farm. Negotiations took 3 months. Lawyers earned money. Accountants became cheerful. In the end, Prairie Horizon signed. They financed a new cold storage building, packing line, and regional distribution network in exchange for long-term branded supply rights and non-exclusive consulting access to Sarah's design methods. No ownership. No controlling stake. No board seats. The Miller farm stayed Millerland. Construction started in spring. Neighbors watched steel rise beside the orchard. Mark Jensen walked over one afternoon and shook his head. I really did laugh at this. You mention that often. Trying to make amends. He looked across the rows. You think this works on smaller acreage? Sarah smiled. Now that's the right question. She began helping nearby farmers plant shelter belts with income species, berry lanes, nut rows, pollinator strips, rotational produce corridors. Not copies. Adaptations. Each farm different. That mattered. Within 5 years, what had once been mocked as foolishness became a regional model for diversified acreage resilience. University tours came regularly. So did school buses. So did people who once slowed down only to laugh. Daniel retired officially, though he still checked things daily for several hours. One autumn evening, he and Sarah stood by the roadside stand watching families carry cider donuts, apples, pumpkins, and jars of preserves to their cars. Corn wrestled between tree lanes glowing orange in sunset light. You know what I learned? Daniel said. Sarah waited. When people laugh early, it usually means they're late. She smiled. That sounds like something you rehearsed. It does, he admitted. Across the road, a man in a new truck slowed to stare at the farm, then kept driving. Years ago, that look meant ridicule. Now it meant envy, because they had laughed when she planted fruit trees between corn rows. And 10 years later, they were still trying to buy what they once said would fail.